look. Starting at number 10, Denmark wins at cycle lanes. Like, it's a win-win for drivers and cyclists. You know, there are cycle lanes in Copenhagen, the capital, and it's practically equal to the amount of pavement there. That's pretty awesome. Now, cycle lanes even have their own traffic lights, so it's incredibly safe, which is a great incentive for bicycle owners to get out there. You don't really have to worry about getting hit by cars like here in Toronto. Bikes just swerve into the street and you're like, dude, you almost died. Denmark's capital, Copenhagen, also has a desire to become completely carbon neutral by the year 2025. And honestly, I bet it's going to hit that goal. Like, it has managed to keep its impact on the environment right down and should be applauded for doing so. Like, they're really working hard to create a cleaner environment for everyone. Also, Copenhagen could be the recycling capital of the world. For years, over half of Copenhagen's city waste has been recycled. Not only are the current residents recycling, but also businesses are on the green movement as well. And it's reported that about 64% of the city's hotels are certified eco-friendly. And it's a seemingly easy task for the city that's named Europe's green capital. Denmark also wins for its LGBTQI rights. They're known for this all over the world. Yeah, did you know that Denmark was the first country in the world to recognize registered partnerships for same-sex couples? And that was back in the year 1989. Also in the year 2009, it became possible for registered gay couples to adopt, and in 2012, it became possible for gay people to be married in a church. Copenhagen is home to one of Europe's oldest gay bars, and it's been in business for over 100 years. Also, do you know that Denmark is a home of Lego? The name Lego actually comes from the Danish words "leg godt," and that means play well. And you know, Legos have helped millions of kids do just that since the year 1932, when Danish carpenter Ole Kirk Christiansen founded the group. In 1939, the Lego factory started off with just 10 employees, and it's grown to produce about 560 billion Lego parts over its years that it's been in business. I've been a big fan of Lego since I was a kid. I used to collect all the different sets and everything. Only thing I hated about Lego is when they were left on the floor and I accidentally stepped on them. That hurts. Halfway to number 5, they're also famous for their educational system. When you go to a Danish university, lectures are held in small groups instead of fully packed rooms. There's also a good chance that the program and the university that you choose have partnerships with research institutions and businesses, which allows you to gain practical skills and make connections for future job. Universities also use a buddy system. They assign another student to greet you and help you settle into the university. You'll also have orientation courses that help you get to know Denmark a little bit better. So if you're an international student and you may not be familiar with some of the cultural practices in Denmark, don't worry, they'll get you set up for that as well while you're learning and studying at school. Denmark also has been consistently rated one of the happiest countries in the world. So in the year 2018, the World Happiness Reports ranked Denmark among the 3 happiest of 155 nations. And this is a qualification that the nation has earned for 7 continuous years. It scores high for all 6 of the key variables that have been found to support well-being. There's income, there's healthy life expectancy, social support, freedom, trust, and generosity. For number 3, there's also Denmark's work-life balance. Now, it's really just a way of life. Danish workers put in the second fewest hours of all Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development countries at 1,412 hours a year. Economic productivity doesn't seem to suffer at all, though. Danes also pay some of the highest income tax rates in the entire world, 45% for your average Danish annual income of 43,000. And guess what? It's 52% of those who earn more than $67,000 US. But in exchange for paying so much of taxes, Danes actually get free healthcare, free K college education, which are students that are actually paid $900 a month, and highly subsidized childcare and generous unemployment benefits. And when surveys are conducted, 9 out of 10 Danes say that they gladly pay more in taxes for the benefits that they get. And then then finally at number 1 we have the food. So Copenhagen apparently is the home to the best restaurant in the world. Not only is the Danish capital home to Noma, named the world's best restaurant in the year 2010, 2011 and 2012, but it's also filled with Michelin star rated restaurants. Copenhagen's other 2 Michelin star rated restaurants are Geranium, and that's run by the world's best chef of 2011, Rasmus Kofoed. Copenhagen also houses a total of 17 Michelin stars across 15 restaurants. Obviously these restaurants, you know, they're hot destinations, so definitely you may just want to check one of them out if you ever go and visit Denmark. Alright, so I'm excited for this one. Let's just jump right in. Starting at number 10, we have the invention of Skype. Skype is a telecom app that specializes in providing video chats and voice calls between computers, tablets, and different mobile devices. You can even use them on Xboxes. Now, Skype was founded in 2003 by Nicholas Zenström, who is from Sweden, and Jannis Friis from Denmark. And in September of 2005, he and his partner sold Skype to eBay for $2.6 billion. And Jannis Friis maintained ownership interest in Skype and sold it to Microsoft for $8.5 billion in May of 2011. Now, of course, I can't not include Lego in this episode. So these colorful building blocks started in Denmark back in the year 1932 in a workshop in Billund, Denmark to be exact, and this workshop was run by Ole Kirk Christensen. Now, Lego sets have passed on from generation to generation, and they span across cultures, and you know, they keep reinventing Legos. They have like Batman Lego, all kind of Lego. It's sold everywhere in the world. Everybody knows about it, everybody talks about it, and yeah. And if you didn't know, it's of 2 Danish words, leg and godt, meaning play well. Number 8 brings us handball. So we can look at handball way back to like the ancient Romans and the ancient Greeks. They played a version of early handball, but it wasn't until later societies where the modern game of handball was invented, which most historians attribute to the efforts of Denmark, as well as Germans and Swedes. However, historians actually suggest that the Danish athlete named Holger Nielsen played a big role in standardizing the rules and structure of the modern game of handball. Number 7 brings us the loudspeaker. Danish engineer Peter Jensen and the American Edwin Pridham, they worked together back in 1915 to invent the Magnavox, which was the first loudspeaker that the world ever saw. Now, as you can imagine, the use of a speaker for public things was completely game-changing. You can reach a larger audience. Even the US President Woodrow Wilson used a Magnavox in 1919 to address the audience in San Diego. There's also the invention of the light machine gun. The Madsen is a light machine gun that Julius A. Rasmussen and Theodore Strobu designed and proposed for adoption by Colonel Wilhelm Hermann Olaf Madsen, who was a Danish Minister of War, and the Danish Army ended up adopting these in 1902. And what makes it so significant was that these were the world's first true light machine guns that were produced in large quantity, and they were able to sell to over 34 different countries. They were used in combat for over 100 years. At number 5, halfway in, we have electromagnetism, which is attributed to Hans Christian Ørsted, and he was born in August 14th, 1777, and he lived up until March 9th, 1851. So who was he? Well, he was a Danish physicist and chemist who discovered that electrocurrents create magnetic fields, which was the first connecting piece between electricity and magnetism, and Ørsted's law and Ørsted was named after him. Number 4 brings us pure yeast. Now, back in 1887, there was a whole lot of excitement for beer drinkers of Denmark when Dr. Emil Christian Hansen discovered a method of actually creating what is called pure yeast, and that ended the beer disease that was plaguing the country years before. Now, this whole method changed everything for the entire industry, and the new yeast was rightfully named the Saccharomyces carlsbergensis. We can also thank Denmark for the dry cell battery. Frederick Louis Wilhelm Hellensen is known to be the person that designed one of the first dry cell batteries all the way back in 1887, and because of his invention, batteries were able to be transported a lot easier. Now, after starting his own factory to produce these batteries, he started selling his batteries to the Danish telephone company. And now today, the company Duracell, we all know those guys, they own Hellesen's brand name. Number 2, we have Google Maps. Now, Google Maps was first started as a program designed by two Danish brothers, Lars and Jens Ilstrup Rasmussen, and they were actually a Sydney, Australia-based company named Where2 Technologies. Now, it was first designed to be separately downloaded by users, but the company later actually pitched the idea for just a purely web-based product to Google, which changed the whole method of distribution. And in October 2004, the company was acquired by Google Inc. Then there was the discovery of insulin. So the Danes are responsible for finding the relationship between hemoglobin and the concentration of carbon dioxide, otherwise known as the Bohr effect. And this was published by the Nobel Peace Prize winner August Krogh and Christian Bohr, who was a son of Niels Bohr, back in 1904. Now, this finding was a huge contribution to the medical field, and it led to the discovery of insulin at Novo Nordisk, which is a Danish founded company that is still exploding with new ideas and innovations today.
Let's throw ourselves right into the facts and let's look at the forces of Denmark, which are known as the Danish Defense Forces, and they are the armed forces that make up the Kingdom of Denmark, which stretches through the mainland all the way to its self-governing nations like Faroe Island and Greenland, and even other places around the world. Yeah, that's right. In case you guys didn't know, Greenland is actually part of Denmark. I actually had no idea as well. I always thought Greenland was kind of like, you know, just this big icy thing that people, you know, only like maybe 1,000 people live on. But yeah, it's part of Denmark. I don't know why I said Denland there. I was trying to say Greenland and Denmark. It didn't really work out. But as for the Danish Defense Forces, let's take a look at how the whole thing works out. First of all, Denmark has a total population of 5,785,864 people. Now, that's, of course, as of a 2018 estimate. Now, keep in mind also, some of the numbers throughout all of this video are just going to be estimates, especially when we break down equipment, because, well, no military really gives out its true numbers of forces because, well, to be honest, there's just classified forces that we don't know of as well. But of this 5.7 million people, they say over 2 million people are classified as fit for service. Now, for its military, it has a total of approximately and most likely over 75,000 people. Now, of course, that is estimated. They have two different classifications of people within the military. They have active and reserves. And the thing for the active personnel, it's rather a hard number to get, because as of 2011, there was approximately 25,109 as of the official report done by the military. But as for today, it's estimated anywhere between 20,000 to anywhere between 30,000 people within the country that are classified as active personnel. Of course, the reserves, which are the Homeland Volunteers, sit at approximately 51,000, with approximately maybe 12,000 in other places. See, now the reason why we can't get an accurate number of that is because, well, there's a thing called conscription. Yes, that's right, conscription within the country actually does exist, and I'm going to go into that right now. Because within the country, the service for conscription does apply, however, it is only applied to males. Of course, anyone over 18 can volunteer for the army, and although women have had a military service history since approximately 1948, it wasn't until 1962 when they were allowed to enter into the ground military. And it's actually really interesting to know that when it comes to the amount of women within the Danish military, in today's world, about 7.33% of the entire forces are women. Also, what's really very unique about this particular country when it comes to its military, a lot of other countries have 3 different divisions, or the military is broken up into 3 different compartments. For Denmark, it's actually 4. This is because the major compartments of the Danish military are the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and of course the Home Guard, which I stated before are pretty much volunteers that are part of this service. Of course, previous to this, I mentioned how hard it was to get an accurate number of how many forces and individuals there are within the personnel. Because for Denmark, the one rule that they do have, if there is ever a major emergency or there's a war that breaks out yet again, all former conscripts are immediately called upon to serve once again. So they'll have a lot of people in their military. But now let's talk about numbers and how much equipment that these guys actually have. Going up into the sky, they have a total aircraft strength of over 113. Now for this, of the total aircraft strength, 30 of them are fighters or classified as attack fighters, which overall the country uses the good old-fashioned F-16 Falcon. It's quite a reliable aircraft. It should also be mentioned that as of 2011, they state that there's 45 in total, but only 30 are currently in operation. Now, as for their transports, they have approximately 39, but that doesn't mean that all 39 are the big transport aircrafts. And those big transport aircrafts are the C-130J-30 Hercules medium transport aircraft, in which they have approximately 4 of them. Of course, they have multiple other pieces of equipment that does transport. For example, they also have the Challenger, and that would help make up these 39 units. For helicopters, though, they do have 35, in which they use the EH-101 Merlin Search and Rescue and Troop Transport Helicopter as their main chopper. And as for the rest of the aircraft, they are listed as trainers, recon, and other services of that nature. Now let's jump down to the ground. Let's take a look at the equipment that needs treads. And that would be tanks. For example, they have approximately 57 combat tanks, in which 38 of these combat tanks are the 120mm Leopard 2A5. Of course, there is armored fighting vehicles, being approximately 673. Currently, their main fighting vehicle is the CV9035, which is Sweden-made, in which there are 45 of them. However, they are also in plans to purchase the MOWAG Piranha 5, which is about 309 of them. They might have already purchased them, but as of 2018, they said that this was the time they were going to do so. Whether or not they're behind on orders or anything like that, I don't really know. As for Denmark, they actually don't use any towed artillery or rocket projectors, but they do have 12 self-propelled artillery. Jumping over to the sea, when it comes to their total Navy assets, they have approximately over 90 of them. Of course, Denmark is a country that doesn't have any aircraft carriers. It doesn't really need any. However, it does have 9 frigates, and the largest of these are the Albasan-class frigates. Currently, they have 2 of these in possession. They have the HDMS Albasan and the HDMS Esbern Snare. For corvettes, they are looking at 0, but however, they do have approximately 7 mine warfare vessels and approximately 15 patrol vessels. Denmark has also been a country that has had submarines in the past. However, as of today, they don't have any, because in 2004, they just pretty much decommissioned or sold off the rest of them, saying they don't really need them. There is talks about whether or not they need them in the future, but as of today, they say they're fine. Now, one other question that I always ask in these military videos is whether or not the country is nuclear capable. So does Denmark have nukes? Well, the big answer to that is no. However, when it comes to places like Greenland, it actually has a history of transporting nuclear missiles and bombs, but that was specifically for the Americans. For example, there was the Thule Air Base disaster, in which a plane went down having 4 nuclear bombs on board it, and apparently to this day there's still one missing. They think it just went up in the wreckage. They're not entirely sure. But however, the thing when it comes to nuclear missiles, one thing that is very important is Denmark is a part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, as it was one of the countries that helped ratify the treaty, signing it in 1968. I also like to point out, when it comes to the amount of resources, when it comes to this particular military and how powerful it actually is, you got to keep in mind that Greenland has a huge uranium deposit. As a matter of fact, they consider it like one of the highest uranium deposits in the entire world. But however, when it comes to mining for uranium, the Kvanefjeld mine has apparently had a ban on mining uranium for years. So unless that changes, it really doesn't matter. But keep in mind, if war were to break out, you could definitely guess that certain rules like that would change. Now, to finish it all off, let's take a look at budget. So the budget for the Denmark military in 2015 sat at approximately 20.9 billion DKK, which translates to about 3 billion USD. And for this budget, according to those numbers, it made up 1.3% of the GDP of the entire country, which is actually under the recommended 2% for EU countries. Because this budget has a tight budget, it's been reported that about 50 to 53% of it goes to paying out military forces, and approximately 14 to 21% is getting new equipment, and 2 to 8% is for ships. As well, the rest is for services such as construction or anything of that nature. Also, I totally forgot to mention that when it comes to the power of this country, Denmark is a country that is a part of NATO, and that's a positive thing. For those who don't know what NATO is, it's a program that's designed to help all signed nations to be protected from foreign invaders. And basically, they all will rise together and defeat them, and I think as of today, there's about 29 countries that are part of NATO. As well, Denmark has great relationships with other countries like Canada, and most importantly, the United States, and many EU countries, but most specifically Germany, in which the three of those are the biggest suppliers of equipment for military and make them a great ally. So the Danish army, how are they different from other armies around the world? Well, first of all, they have an extensive history. But as for today, the army's main mission states that the army guarantees that Denmark can at any time provide a robust reaction camp group in international operations and solve the necessary tasks at home. So it is known as the Danish army, and it has been around for a long time, and it's got a history. As a matter of fact, it's one of the longest standing armies in today's world, as it was originally founded on November 17th, 1614, when a conflict between Denmark, Norway, and Sweden was happening at the time. Although the country and region of Denmark had its own armies long before this and during Viking times, it also did have several conflicts with Sweden even in the 1400s. But as for the modernized version of this army, it was formed pretty much after the Kalmar War, which was between Denmark, Norway, and the country of Sweden. Now, the reason this new army was formed was simply out of the lessons that they learned from the Kalmar War. They learned that they needed a more unified army that was designed to protect Denmark's interest and prevent war. And because of that, it was established by King Christian IV, who actually served as commander-in-chief of this new army, which as of today is over 400 years old. That is an old army. So for this newly formed army of Denmark, one of its first major engagements was during the 30-Year War, which was a war between many of the Central European countries that began in 1618. Although the war did begin in 1618, Denmark didn't mobilize and enter the war until about 1625. This is when Danish forces had been mobilized and sent to Lutheran communities of what is now Lower Saxony in Germany. And it was during that time when Denmark made its point during the war, as it defended these Lutheran communities against the imperial forces. Of course, throughout history, Denmark has been a part of many major conflicts, such as the Northern War, the Dano-Sweden War of 1657 and 1658, the Napoleonic War, and of course the First and Second War of Schleswig, and many more. To go a little further into this, the Second War of Schleswig is a very important war for Denmark, because although it ended in 1864, it was the last time for a long time that Denmark had ever committed the Danish army to any form of combat. But now it's the 1900s, and Denmark actually remained very quiet for the early turn of that century. And although the Danish army kept its nose out of many other conflicts, the Second World War was just booming around the corner. So the one thing was, when it came to Denmark and its sort of position during the Second World War, is they really didn't have much of a position because they were occupied very quickly. Because on April 9th of 1940, Germany had began its occupation of Denmark. It was in the early morning around 4:50 a.m. that the Danish army had first come into conflict with the German military just outside Lintofbjerg, which was one of the first major battles that began the occupation of Denmark. Now, compared to other countries around the world, for Denmark, a lot of historians actually argue over the amount of casualties that happened during the war, because it's estimated that anywhere between 20 to 40 Danish soldiers were lost or wounded, with about 20 Germans who were also lost or wounded. But either way, guys, that is just a brief look and history at the Danish army, because I want to jump into the modern world, because there's some interesting facts about what it is today. Because it's interesting to know that in 1995, the Danish army was a part of an operation in Bosnia, known as Operation Bolabank, or in English, Operation Hooligan Bashing. Should also be mentioned, this is also linked to Operation Amanda, in which Danish forces were heavily a part of the United Nations Protection Force, also known as UNPRO-4. It should be noted that on April of 1994, during Operation Bolabank, it was the first conflict that Denmark had ever been a part of since the Second World War. And even so, it's interesting to know, and a lot of people kind of just say this, it's not realistically historically proven. But during these two operations, it was the first time that Denmark or any country ever in the world used the Leopard 1 tanks in a form of offensive combat. Which I do find it kind of hard to believe that the Leopard 1 hadn't seen any major form of hostile engagement, because the tank had been around since the 1960s, I believe, and it's a very old tank. However, whether or not you want to give that one to the Danish army or not, one thing that is known is it has been the largest battle with the UN Profor during the Bosnian forces, and although it might seem like a very small battle because the Danish forces only had 3 Leopard tanks, the truth is it's one of the largest battles that Denmark ever was a part of since the war. But now let's fast forward just a little bit more to actual today and find out what it's all about. For example, as of right now, the Chief of Defense is General Bjorn Bisserup. As for today, they say the army itself is believed to have approximately 12,500 active personnel. And of this active personnel, they say on an average that there's approximately 6,500 soldiers and approximately 4,000 to 6,000 conscripts every single year. Of course, within the army, it's not that small. They also have a reserve personnel of at least 63,000 individuals. Should also mention that when it comes to women, they are allowed to serve in all forms of the army, and that became a rule in 1974. So how does the hierarchy work, and how does this army break down? Well, let's take a little look. Unlike some other armies around the world, Denmark is said to only have one division, called the Danish Division, in which under there are 2 brigades. As well, these 3 major units are located in 2 areas of the country. For example, the Danish Division and 1st Brigade operates out of Haderslev, and of course, the 2nd Brigade operates out of Slagelse to the east. Under all of this, there is several different types of services, such as the Army Combat Fire and Support, which is basically your artillery. There's also the Engineer Regiment, the Signal Regiment, Logistics Battalion, and of course, Army Intelligence. Also, I should mention that there is a special cavalry unit called the Guards Hussars. I always thought that that was a really cool name. And under this, there is a regiment also called the Jutland Dragoon Regiment. Now, this is a very important regiment because they are the only armored battalion and they use the main battle tanks. And I should also mention that it was this particular regiment that was used during Operation Bullbank. And to break down some of the equipment that this army uses, in the Dragoon Regiment, they use the Leopard 2A5s, which have a 120mm cannon. Currently, according to the Danish Army website, they say they have 51 of these tanks. Other reports also say they do have those, but about 38 of them are only in active service and the rest are in storage. As for infantry fighting vehicles, they use the Swedish-made CV-90, in which they say they have approximately 45 of them. For the Danish army, when it comes to the main rifles, they use the Canadian C7 and the Canadian C8. I'm Canadian, so I'm proud that you guys are using our rifles. Yeah, they're good. As well, for machine guns, they use the German-made MG3 and the American M60. And of course, we can't finish this video off without talking about medals, because that's very important as well. Because the highest form of respect and honor that one can achieve when it comes to medals is one can get the Valor Cross. And believe it or not, this is a rather new medal as well, as it was established on November 14th of 2011. And to date, only one soldier has received the Valor Cross, and that is Sergeant Casper Westphalen Matheson, who on February 19th, 2010, held his position until reinforcements came, and even used his own body to block his wounded fellow soldiers from incoming fire. So with all these forces, I should also mention that Denmark has one very interesting thing that not many other countries have when it comes to training its officers. And that is the fact that when it comes to the Royal Danish Military Academy, it is one of the few countries and militaries that train their officers in a palace, which is the Frederiksberg Palace. And they have been training there since 1869, but beforehand, it was a summer residence for the royal family.